Right now, you're wearing clothes. That probably wasn't the hardest decision you'll make today, but chances are you still spent a surprising amount of time on it. Studies suggest the average person spends around 17 minutes every morning deciding what to wear. That's more time than many people spend thinking about breakfast. For some people, probably more time than they spend questioning the meaning of life. Human priorities are fascinating. You can forget your wallet, you can forget your phone, you can even forget there's an exam this morning until your friend texts, "Where are you?" But almost nobody has ever sprinted halfway down the street before suddenly stopping and saying, "Wait, I think I forgot my pants." That mistake is remarkably rare. And here's where things get even stranger. We have built an entire legal system around clothing. There are laws, there are rules, police officers, judges, entire institutions that can get involved if you decide today's outfit is absolutely nothing. Think about that. A buffalo spends its entire life completely naked. Nobody files a complaint. Society seems perfectly okay with that. A tiger has never once thought, "You know what this jungle needs? Business casual." Which raises a surprisingly difficult question. When did humans start wearing clothes? Why are we the only species that cares this much? By the end of this video, you're probably never going to look at your closet the same way again. So if you enjoy exploring the strange stories hidden inside everyday life, hit like, subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Let's start with the explanation everyone thinks they already know. Humans lost their fur. Humans got cold. Humans invented clothes. Case closed. It's neat, it's logical, it's exactly the kind of answer that sounds so obvious nobody bothers questioning it. Except the timeline has other plans. Modern humans began leaving Africa in large numbers around 70,000 years ago, spreading into places where winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was actively trying to kill you. So if clothing existed because of freezing temperatures, that's when we'd expect it to appear. But archaeologists tell a different story. Evidence of specialized hide-working tools begins showing up around 120,000 years ago, and many researchers believe clothing had already become widespread by roughly 75,000 years ago. In other words, people were investing time and effort into making clothing before most humans had ever experienced the brutally cold climates we usually associate with it. It's a little like buying snow chains while still living on a tropical island. Possible? Sure. Normal? Not exactly. So maybe warmth wasn't the original reason. Then what about protection? Thorns, sharp rocks, mosquitoes that apparently woke up every morning choosing violence. That sounds reasonable too. Until you ask one very annoying question. If clothing existed to protect the body, why weren't the first things covered our hands and feet? Those are the parts constantly getting cut, burned, scraped, and stepped on. Instead, the earliest clothing appears to have focused on the torso and groin, the places least likely to slam into a sharp rock every afternoon. That's an odd design choice, if practicality was the entire goal. One explanation starts falling apart, then the next one does too, which leaves us with a much stranger mystery. If humans weren't solving cold, and they weren't simply solving protection, what exactly were they solving? Even stranger, how could scientists possibly know the answer? After all, animal skins rot, plant fibers disappear. The oldest witness to the birth of clothing wasn't a fossil. It wasn't a cave painting. It wasn't even human. And that's where this story takes a very unexpected turn. Specifically, lice. I know, this is probably not where you expected the story to go. Researchers at the University of Florida, led by evolutionary biologist David Reed and his colleagues, compared the DNA of two close relatives, head lice and body lice. Here's the important biological detail. Head lice spend their entire lives in human hair. Body lice don't. They live almost exclusively in clothing, hiding in seams and folds before crawling onto human skin to feed. Take away the clothes, and body lice simply can't survive. That makes them something surprisingly useful. Not just parasites, time capsules. When researchers reconstructed their evolutionary history, they discovered that body lice split from head lice roughly 83,000 to 170,000 years ago. Think about what that actually means. Humans had been wearing clothing consistently enough for an entirely new ecological niche to appear, and an entirely new population of parasites to evolve into it, which is both scientifically fascinating and deeply unfortunate. Somewhere along the way, humanity accidentally invented sweaters, and immediately another species looked at them and thought, "Excellent, free real estate. In one of history's strangest plot twists, the oldest witness to human fashion wasn't a tailor. It wasn't an archaeologist. It wasn't even a cave painting. It was a tiny insect that nobody has ever been happy to meet. But here's the catch. The lice answer when. They don't answer why. They tell us that clothing already existed. They don't tell us what made our ancestors decide to cover themselves in the first place. And maybe that's because clothing was never really a story about the body. Maybe it was always a story about something happening inside the human mind. So the lies tell us when, but they don't tell us why. To find that answer, we need to go somewhere else entirely. Not to a laboratory, not to a genetics database, to a cave on the southern coast of Africa. Archaeologists excavating sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa uncovered something unexpected. Pieces of red ochre, a naturally occurring pigment that had been deliberately ground, scraped, and in some cases engraved. Not collected by accident, prepared on purpose. The dates on these findings push back further than 100,000 years ago, long before body lice evolved to live in clothing, long before bone needles existed, long before anyone had figured out that animal hide could become a sleeve. Someone was already thinking about how they looked. Let that sit for a second. Before shirts, before shoes, before the eternal human struggle of deciding whether this shade of beige counts as a neutral, someone picked up a lump of red rock and thought, you know what's missing from today? Me, but redder. That is not survival behavior. That is a person trying to look good. Which brings us to archaeologist Ian Gilligan, who in 2009 made an argument that's easy to overlook, but surprisingly difficult to shake. To make clothing, he pointed out, you first have to imagine yourself wearing it. You look at an animal hide. You don't just see skin. You see tomorrow. You picture cutting it, preparing it, saving it for weather that hasn't arrived yet. You solve a future problem before the future exists. No other animal does this. A chimpanzee doesn't look at a leaf and think, I should hold on to this. Winter is coming. But we did. And that shift, from reacting to the world to mentally simulating it, is one of the earliest signs of the modern human mind at work. But there's something even deeper underneath the planning. Something that changed not just what humans did, but how they experienced existing. Psychologists call it theory of mind, the ability to step outside yourself and imagine what you look like through someone else's eyes. One day, somewhere in prehistoric Africa, a human brain did something it had never quite done before. It looked outward and asked, what do they think when they look at me? Everything changed after that. Your body stopped being just a body. It became a message. Paint could signal belonging. A particular hide could signal status. Decoration could communicate trust, power, or danger before a single word left your mouth. In a way, humans invented personal branding roughly 100,000 years before they invented writing, which is impressive. Also, somehow, very on brand for us. There was just one problem. Identity is a wonderful thing to have. It is, however, completely useless at keeping you warm. Knowing that clothing could say something about you didn't automatically produce well-made clothes. To turn that idea into something you could actually wear through a Siberian winter, humanity needed one small invention. Small enough to fit between two fingers, consequential enough to change the course of human history. Ideas are wonderful. Unfortunately, ideas are also terrible at keeping you warm. Knowing that clothing could communicate identity didn't magically produce well-made clothes. At first, our ancestors were probably doing the prehistoric equivalent of throwing an animal hide over their shoulders and hoping for the best. Functional? Mostly. Fashionable? Let's be generous and say experimental. The archaeological record suggests that by around 120,000 years ago, humans were already using specialized stone tools to scrape, clean, and prepare animal hides. Sites across Africa preserve these hide-working tools, showing that skin wasn't just a byproduct of hunting anymore. It had become a valuable resource in its own right. By roughly 75,000 years ago, evidence suggests clothing had become common enough to be a regular part of human life. But then came the real breakthrough. Around 50,000 years ago, deep inside Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists uncovered one of the most remarkable tools from the prehistoric world. A finely crafted bone needle with a carefully drilled eye carved from the hollow bone of a bird. That tiny hole changed everything. For the first time, clothing could be stitched instead of simply wrapped. Sleeves, seams, better insulation. Garments shaped to fit the body instead of dangling from it like a badly secured blanket. It's amazing how much human history depends on one very determined person deciding, you know what this stick needs? A smaller hole. And here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Modern humans weren't alone. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals were systematically processing animal hides using specialized stone tools long before they disappeared. They weren't simply surviving the Ice Age, they were engineering solutions for it. Then there's the mysterious Denisovans, first identified in 2010 from a fingerbone found in that very same Siberian cave. Alongside their remains, researchers found carefully crafted ornaments with drilled holes, suggesting symbolic decoration and sophisticated craftsmanship. 3 different human lineages, different environments, different histories, yet all moving toward remarkably similar solutions, which raises a fascinating possibility. Maybe clothing wasn't a uniquely human invention. Maybe any intelligent species with clever hands, enough imagination, and a very cold winter eventually arrives at exactly the same conclusion. Some inventions aren't accidents. They're inevitable. For tens of thousands of years, humans had been learning how to make better clothing. Then, nature raised the stakes. Between roughly 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, Earth entered a series of brutal glacial cycles. Temperatures fell, rainfall shifted, familiar landscapes disappeared. Entire ecosystems that had supported human life for generations became unpredictable almost overnight. Some genetic studies suggest that the total human population may have dropped to somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 individuals. Imagine that. Today, that's about the population of a small town. Back then, it may have been nearly everyone. Survival suddenly depended on more than strength or intelligence. It depended on preparation. Groups that knew how to tan hides, stitch garments, and layer clothing could trap warm air close to the body, slowing heat loss when temperatures plunged. The advantage wasn't dramatic, it was decisive. Those groups survived. They raised children. Their knowledge survived with them. The others slowly disappeared from the story. Evolution doesn't vote. It simply remembers what works. But here's the part that feels unmistakably human. Even while the Ice Age was still unfolding, people were already thinking about more than survival. Around 30,000 years ago, inside Zudzwana Cave in present-day Georgia, archaeologists discovered twisted flax fibers preserved by the cave's cool, stable conditions. Some of those fibers had been dyed black, turquoise, and even pink. That tiny detail says a lot. Nobody spends hours dyeing thread because gray isn't warm enough. Color costs time. Color costs effort. Color means choice. Some prehistoric artisan looked at a perfectly useful piece of fiber and thought, it works, but it could look better. That may be one of the most human thoughts ever recorded. Thousands of years later, after the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 BC, clothing became far more than protection. Linen, wool, cotton, and eventually silk turned fabric into wealth, trade, status, and political power. Humans didn't simply adapt to the world. We created a second skin, and then used it to build civilization itself. This morning, you got dressed. Maybe it took 30 seconds. Maybe it took 17 minutes. Maybe you changed outfits 3 times before deciding that somehow the first one was the best all along. Humanity has made astonishing technological progress. Apparently, choosing a shirt is still beyond us. But here's the strange part. Your brain wasn't simply deciding what to wear. It was performing a calculation that has been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. Not, what's the weather today, but how do I want other people to see me today? That's a completely different question. A business suit, a leather jacket, a sports jersey, a lab coat, a wedding dress. Before you say a single word, you've already started communicating. Competent, creative, friendly, successful, rebellious, approachable, dangerous, or perhaps just someone who desperately underestimated how cold it was this morning. The remarkable thing is that this isn't vanity, at least not entirely. It's the inheritance of a brain that learned something extraordinary hundreds of thousands of years ago, the ability to see itself through someone else's eyes. Psychologists call it theory of mind. Evolution turned it into one of our greatest advantages. Civilization turned it into your closet. Every morning, your brain silently predicts how strangers, coworkers, friends, and family might interpret what you're wearing. Most of the time, you don't even notice the calculation happening. You just call it getting dressed. And that ancient mental shortcut explains why being overdressed feels awkward, why being underdressed feels embarrassing, why wearing the wrong thing can somehow ruin an otherwise perfectly good day. Your ancestors weren't worrying about office parties. They were worrying about survival. But the same social machinery is still running, just with better fabrics. It's funny when you think about it. Our species survived ice ages, invented sewing needles, crossed continents, built cities, created global trade networks, walked on the moon. And despite all of that, millions of perfectly healthy adults still stand in front of a closet overflowing with clothes every single morning and confidently announce, "I have absolutely nothing to wear." Some evolutionary problems, it seems, never really get solved. So here's one final question. If you could travel back 170,000 years, knowing everything you know now, would you really be comfortable living completely naked? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through one of humanity's strangest inventions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. This morning, you got dressed. Maybe it took 30 seconds. Maybe it took 17 minutes. Maybe you changed outfits twice, only to decide the first one was fine all along. Humanity has survived ice ages, crossed continents, built civilizations, walked on the moon, and somehow, choosing a shirt is still one of our greatest daily challenges. But now you know what that ordinary little moment really contains. It stretches back more than 170,000 years, when body lice first evolved to live in human clothing. The oldest biological clue that our ancestors were already dressing themselves consistently. By around 120,000 years ago, specialized tools were transforming animal hides into usable materials. Around 75,000 years ago, clothing had become part of everyday life. About 70,000 years ago, modern humans carried those skills with them as they spread beyond Africa. By 50,000 years ago, a tiny bone needle hidden inside Denisova cave in Siberia made fitted clothing possible. Then, around 30,000 years ago, the dyed flax fibers preserved inside Zudzuana cave in present-day Georgia revealed something even more surprising. Ice Age humans weren't just trying to survive, they already cared about color. From the ochre workshops along the southern coast of Africa, to a finely crafted needle buried inside a Siberian cave, to brightly dyed fibers hidden in the mountains of Georgia, the archaeological record tells one continuous story. Clothing didn't appear overnight, it evolved, just as we did. Humans didn't simply evolve to adapt to the world. We built ourselves a second skin, and then used that second skin to tell everyone else who we were. Which means, every morning when you stand in front of your closet, your brain isn't simply asking, "What should I wear today?" It's asking a much older question. How do I want to be seen? That was the question ochre answered, the question sewing needles refined, the question your wardrobe is still answering today. The details changed, the question never did. And perhaps that's why, after hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, after surviving ice ages, inventing sewing, building empires, and creating the global fashion industry, millions of us still stare at a closet full of perfectly good clothes and somehow conclude, "I have absolutely nothing to wear." Some instincts never go out of style. So what do you think? Why did humans really start wearing clothes? To stay warm? To stay safe? Or because, for the first time in history, someone realized another pair of eyes was looking back? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through one of humanity's oldest inventions, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.